Hey everyone, it's Lassie, and welcome back to Virtual Paddock. And as you can see, I'm sitting here in my Playseat challenge, which I've had now for around 3.5 years, and it's generally held up well. It's certainly a practical rig. It's great to have something that you can store away after racing, especially for someone like me. I don't have a lot of space, so I don't have the space for a permanent rig at the moment. And generally I will say that overall this is not a bad rig. But it does unfortunately have quite a few drawbacks. There's quite a bit of play in the frame, as you can see. Then the way the pedal frame is connected to the main frame with two brackets. Those brackets quite often slide out of place. So especially on longer drives, I've had the pedals suddenly shift quite a bit to the right or to the left. Then you cannot actually hard mount the pedals, so for my CSL Elite load cell pedals I had to improvise. And another very common problem is that if you brake really heavily, this can actually happen. It lifts up in the middle. And over time, those problems have become increasingly frustrating for me. So a while ago, I asked in some forums like Race Department and also on Reddit if there are any rigs that tackle some of those issues, aside from the Next Level Racing FGT Lite and GT Lite, which honestly really only tackle the issue of not being able to hard mount the pedals. But then on Reddit I got a recommendation for a few reinforcement products for the Playseat challenge by a company called Indigo Lime. So recently I went ahead and ordered them, and today we're going to see what they're all about. Alright, so I actually ordered 4 different products, and I'm going to start with the seat still folded up, because the first one I'm going to look at are these 4 clamps, which hold the Fanatec CSL Elite pedals to the pedal frame. And these are actually product specific, so you can, for example, also order them for Husingfeld pedals. But obviously I have Fanatec pedals, so I ordered the Fanatec ones. And you might notice that I've removed the foam because it was starting to rip itself apart, and there was no point in keeping it really. But maybe that was a mistake, because it turned out that these in isolation, without the foam, weren't quite tight enough to really hold it in place well. So I had to combine it with kind of the classic method of keeping these pedals on the Playseat challenge: zip ties. Now I have already tested it with this setup, and while there is still the tiniest bit of movement, as you can see, when you're driving you don't actually notice it, and it does feel more stable than with my previous solution. Now I actually had to change my pedal setup a bit. Mainly I had to mount both my clutch and my throttle one step inwards. I previously had mounted them all the way to the outside. But because these clamps go right under the base of each pedal, that wouldn't have worked. And I was worried that for sequential cars where I do left foot braking, that would maybe be a bit too tight with the feet really close together, but I've already tried it, as I mentioned, and it's actually not that bad. Get used to it pretty quickly. Now, the next part that we're going to look at are these two, the pedal pivot reinforcement clamps. Now, these replace 2 of these brackets, and they're designed to prevent it from lifting up in the middle on the heavy braking. The way they do that is by actually taking away one of the pivot points, because as you can tell, this one allows for 2 pivot points, one at the main frame and one at the pedal frame. And if you apply a lot of pressure at both ends, so on the brake pedal as well as kind of leaning back into the seat, and then the middle gets light, it's obviously going to lift up, especially if it has 2 pivot points in the middle. But with this you only have 1 pivot point. Like, I can lift it up like this, but it doesn't pivot here. And also there's a lot more surface area. If you look at, all of this is on the floor. Whereas with this clamp, you only have this much surface area. So it keeps it a lot more stable. Now you can still adjust it side to side, but it's actually a lot easier to move the main frame than it is to move the pedal frame. Like, if I try to move the pedal frame like this, I just end up turning the entire thing. And when I'm sitting in the rig, obviously my body weight is keeping the rig down in place. So as far as I can tell so far, there's not a lot of side-to-side movement anymore when I'm actually driving. Next part we're going to look at is these two, which are the structural reinforcements for the wheel plate. And the way these work is, once you've put the wheel plate to your desired angle, you simply turn them like this, and they look down from under this bolt. Do the same to this one. Then you simply tighten this screw slightly, like around half a turn to a full turn. The same with this one. And it's all in place. And it's perfectly stable. So pretty simple, and when you're done racing and you want to put it away, simply slightly loosen it again. Once again, same with this one. Put down, and then you can fold the wheel plate up again and store it away. And the last part that we're going to look at is this, the wheel plate pivot reinforcement. Now what I noticed is that this actually seems to allow to swing out the wheel plate much wider than it originally does, because usually it stops like around here. Whereas with this you can swing it all the way down. But to be honest, this is actually the part I needed least, and I got mainly because, except for the pedal clamps, I ordered the whole thing as a bundle because it made it a bit cheaper. The thing is, I always get into the rig from this side, because on the other side I really don't have the space. So I never actually open it, but still kind of nice to have. Now, before I go into how these actually feel when driving, I think it's worth mentioning that the building instructions were great, not complicated at all, and they were pretty easy to set up. And also didn't take long to set up. I don't quite remember how long exactly, but definitely not too long. Let's talk about the most important part, which is obviously the driving. So I've had these for about 3 weeks now, and it definitely feels more stable than it did before. It's not a magic fix, so for example there's still some play in the frame, but it's definitely an improvement. And I'd say the biggest improvement is actually on the braking with the pedal pivot reinforcements, because I feel like I've got a lot more confidence on the brake now. It doesn't lift up at all when I go hard on the brakes, and especially in cars without ABS, that makes it a lot easier to brake at maximum. Right, so now of course there's one question left. Would I recommend this? And the answer is partly. I would recommend the Playseat Challenge Reinforcement Bundle, which is basically all of this except for the pedal clamps. And the one part I will recommend most is the pedal pivot reinforcement. They do a great job of holding it down under heavy braking. I feel like I've got more confidence on the brakes now, especially in cars without ABS. And I can go full on the brakes lean back in the seat and it doesn't lift up. But the one part that at this point I wouldn't recommend is the pedal clamps. Partly because they don't actually keep the pedals from sliding up and down the frame if you don't use zip ties. But more importantly, at this point my pedals are being held on by 3 clamps and not 4, because one of them has already broken. The problem is they're very thin at the bottom and one of them apparently couldn't take it anymore. It broke off at the bottom. It doesn't seem to affect the stability too much, but I don't think they're well designed. And I would recommend, if you own Fanatec CSL Elite load cell pedals at least, where of course you're using heavier brakes than on non-load cell brakes, and you're looking to hard mount them on a Playseat challenge, honestly, at this point, look for a different solution. Alright, so I hope that was informative, so thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you want to see more content like this, be sure to click like and subscribe. So, till next time, use the downforce, and see you soon.